All right. Everyone hear me well? Good. Awesome. Thank you for coming after lunch. I know everyone just wants to sleep. So do I. So from 0 to 1, building a real-world Flutter application. What you learn about me throughout this talk is I'm super lazy. I'm so lazy that I took the title of the talk from that Peter Thiel book. And so I'm like, whatever. I just need a good title from 0 to 1. So this talk is really about me building a real-world Flutter application in record time, really 5 days. And the application is actually pretty big. It has about 500,000 users. And so I said, let's build it in Flutter. And we'll find out why and how I built it really quickly. Because I'm lazy, I use a lot of libraries. So yes, I just talked about the first part. Second part is the architecture of the app. I'm going to spend about 2 minutes on it, just a high-level overview of how the app looks. And then we'll go through each section and talk about the tips and tricks I learned from building that specific section and really which libraries to use. So about me, this is my funniest scene. Who am I? I don't know. So who am I really? I'm a Google developer expert in Dart and Flutter. I've been doing Dart for a long, long time. I think I started Dart probably like 2 years after or a year after it was released, mainly because I was tired of just doing web stuff and I just wanted to do something else aside JavaScript. And I really started Dart from the server. And I started using Dart on the server a lot, built this app in 2015 or 2014 in Dart on the server, and it was really good. So I just fell in love with Dart, started doing it on the web eventually, and then now with Flutter. I wrote, anyone read Flutter for Android on Flutter.io? Yes, 1, 2. That was me. I wrote that in like 2 months. So if you find spelling mistakes, that's all me. I've been an Android developer for a long time, which is very relevant because Flutter is a much better experience for me as an Android developer. I've been doing Android since M1, when Android didn't even have a keyboard, believe it or not. So you just had to have a hardware device. Do you remember, anyone remember the G1 device? Yes, yeah, well, this is Google, I'm sure. Obviously, you guys built it. And then I'm also a senior engineer at Zoom.ai. This is what I do during the day. So I do a lot of things. I don't know how I have time for any of this. Zoom.ai is an AI-based automated assistant. That's all I'm going to say about that for now. And outside of work, I'm an entrepreneur trying tons of different ideas. And this is why Flutter is also good. I do a lot of mobile apps. I do a lot of web stuff, backend stuff. And Dart and Flutter just help me make stuff really quickly, try it out, fail a million times, get rich off a couple of them. So the one that I got, made some money is Ven Chat. I started it in 2015. It's one of the top 150 to 200 grossing apps, depending on the month. It's very variable. It has 500,000 installs. It's essentially a chat app for singles. There's nothing special about it. And it's built in Android currently with a Dart backend. And so where does Flutter fit into this? Well, every time I look at stats on apps making money, anyone I talk to in the industry, they're always telling me about how iOS is making a lot more money. Any app published in iOS just makes 2 times, 3 times the money. So I wanted to build an iOS app. The problem is I don't have time. I have a day job, and I come home and I work on this stuff or I'm trying new stuff. And I don't want to build an iOS app and then maintain 2 apps all at once, right? Because not only do I spend 3 months building an iOS app, then I got to spend the rest of the app's life cycle maintaining new features on iOS, maintaining new features in Android, doing the same thing over and over again. It's a nightmare. I don't want to do that. That's how I feel whenever I thought about doing iOS. And then Swift came along, and I'm like, maybe I'll do Swift. Then I looked at it again. I'm like, no, forget that. Not doing that. So Flutter became the obvious choice for me. A lot of people said, well, you still have to write 2 apps. I'm like, yeah, but then I can use iOS as a guinea pig, test the app on there, test the Flutter app on iOS, get all the bugs hammered out, all the usability, whatever, and then just file build on Android and get it published there. So it's a very seamless process. I don't want to touch my revenue stream on Android, so it makes sense for me to build an iOS Flutter app, test it out, and deploy. So that's how I feel I'll be after I deploy the iOS app. So it just got submitted to Apple for approval yesterday. Should be in stores soon. So let me give you a quick demo of how the app is. Very simple. What I did for the demo is, because it's a chat app, I replaced all the pictures with randomuser.me, and I recorded a video. Oh, I recorded a video here. All right, so here's the app, and this is all in Flutter. So this is running on iPhone X. or the simulator iPhone X. And I'm just going to, it's like a 40-second preview. You can scroll. There's a bunch of people there. That crazy guy over there. I can see the new members that just recently joined. And then I can see a list of all people that have sent me a message. I can click on a person, for example, this person right here, and send them a message, right? Simple, and that's about it. And so when I ended up building the app was roughly 60% less code than Android. It is a lot. Especially for a single developer just building this in his free time, it was a lot less code. That's mainly because Flutter just makes everything so much easier, right? Building list views on Android, you got to build up an adapter, set up recycling, or doing all sorts of crazy stuff. On Flutter, I just pass in an array into a list, and I'm good to go, right? And it really took me 5 days. After all that procrastination, I'm like, you know what? I finally need to build this. I sat there, started building it, and within 15 to 20 hours, I was done. Five after work days, so that's like 2 hours a day or something, and I was done. That was me for a couple days, working away. And the architecture is pretty simple for the app. We have a WebSocket that comes in, and that's really for all the chat, the real-time stuff. We're not using Firebase for real-time. That's because when you send a message, it needs to go to our server, do a lot of spam analysis on it, tons of moderation and everything, and then we send it to the user. And so we use a WebSocket for that. The WebSocket then triggers an event bus message, which is when you're chatting with the member, a message comes in, you can start replying to the member. And then also, as you chat, your points go down. So there's an in-app currency. You have a finite amount of points before you have to buy more points to chat. And so the points are also being pushed by WebSocket whenever you send a message or when someone sends a message to you. And then lastly, there's a complicated REST API. There's like 40, 50 endpoints there doing all sorts of stuff from uploading pictures to videos, audio clips, creating profiles, downloading tons of data. Lots and lots of stuff there. So I'll go through each one of these pieces and talk about the challenges I faced and how I solved it in record time. The first one is WebSockets. Like I said, WebSockets allow real-time chat between the user, the server, and the user again. The problem was WebSockets need to be open during the app, but when the app is in the background, I need WebSockets to stop. So on Android and iOS, there's an on-resume, on-pause callback done. On Android, at least, I used WebSocket stop, and then when the on-pause and then on-resume, I did WebSocket.start. I wanted to find something similar on Flutter, and I did, thanks to Widgets binding observer. If everyone can see that code. The slides will be up later too, but I'm just going to quickly describe it. Widgets binding observer is a way for you to listen to your application states. And this was perfect for me, so what I did was I set up a widget binding observer at the top level of my app. That's the only place I need this WebSocket to start, because the rest of it is handled by event bus. And I set that up. I set up an instance in the init state, and then I get rid of it when you're disposing of the state. And then in did application lifecycle change, I just detect, hey, is the app open or is the app closed? Super simple architecture pattern that I found was super easy for me to just turn on the WebSocket and turn it off. And the big thing is it helps me conserve battery life. Because if I keep the WebSocket running in the background, you just have an open socket going, and it's just going to eat up the person's data and also the battery life. So Widgets binding observer is a really useful trick if you have something long running that you want to pause when the application goes in the background. The second is the points are an in-app currency in the app, like I said before. Whenever you do something, points are being used. Now, the points are actually shown everywhere throughout the UI. If you browse the app a lot, you'll see that everywhere you go, you'll see points and how many points you have. And those points are always being updated depending on your interactions with the app. And so my initial pattern there was build a simple event bus. On every widget, every page, I have an event bus that's listening to the points. And then when you go off the page, I close the event bus, and I listen to it again on the next page. It seemed too messy. There had to be an easier way. And so I started digging through the documentation, and I found this great thing called inherited widget. And inherited widget is a simple way to pass a piece of data across all your widgets without having to set up a bunch of event listeners, without having to call a set state whenever data is updated. And so what I did was I set up an inherited widget at the root of my widget tree at the start, and then that passed in points. And all I had to do was just have one event bus listener, 4 points coming in from my WebSocket, and that just sent out an update that propagated throughout the app, whatever was active, and the points got updated. So code sample there is, here's my points widget. Really simple. I just extend inherited widget. All the constructor takes is the actual points that the user has as this point, and then a child. And the child, in my case, is the entire application. And then should notify update. When should the inherited widget notify its children that there's been an update to the points? When the points are not the same as the new points. Simple logic there. And then I just wrote a simple helper function called of, which takes in a context and searches through the widget tree to find where this points widget is. And that's how I get a handle to this widget. Then I set it up in my application at the top there. So this is my main.dart file. I call new points widget, pass in points. There's some code above it that's just actually listening to the WebSocket and getting the points coming in. And then there's my material app, which is the child there. After that, somewhere, anywhere in my app in the widget tree, I can call, if you notice, points widget.of context.points. And wherever I'm listening to that, whenever points are updated, that's going to trigger an update on that widget. And I'll get the most recent amount of points that the user has. This is really useful because it helps you save memory state also. Rather than opening tons of listeners and then forgetting to close them, that's a problem that I kept running into, where I kept forgetting to cancel the stream subscription. And I kept running into widgets being updated in the background and causing all sorts of issues. So inherited widget is your friend. Use it for when you want to pass some piece of data across the application. It seems daunting. The docs aren't super clear on it, but if you take a look at the sample, and there's a great Medium post on it too, you'll understand that it's actually a very simple concept, and you can really use it anytime you want when you have a single piece of data flowing through your application. Now, once I had these two things going, my next big challenge on Android was I use retrofit. Anyone here used retrofit before? Yes, OK, great. Lots of Android guys here. So retrofit, for those that haven't used it, basically takes the JSON and converts it into POJO. Awesome. There's nothing like this on Flutter that I found, mainly because Flutter doesn't have reflection, right? And so the big problem there was I had so many endpoints and so many data types. I'm a lazy developer. I did not want to write down all these single data types over and over again and build out a from JSON and to map and all sorts of crazy stuff there. So I started digging. And I found this great library called Jaguar Serializer. Anyone here used this before? No, perfect. No one knows about this library, and I don't know why. This is awesome. So what Jaguar Serializer does is, here's a simple code snippet. I have a message class. Message is just a simple object, simple PODO, as I like to call it. And all I'm doing here is I'm annotating that this should be generated. And I override the to map, and I fill out what it should be when it converts into a map, when I'm actually sending it back to the server. And then in my pub spec, I enter Jaguar Serializer version 0.5.1, and I install the command line tool, Jaguar CLI. I run it, and it automatically generates the actual Dart file with all the from JSON and to map stuff done for me. And so this is how I use it. I call it an http.get. This is me making a request for a conversation, passing a conversation ID. When the message comes in, I take the response body, I convert it into a map, and I deserialize it right into a PODO, right? And it works really well. And so now I just have a message object that I can pass around my app versus having a map and then converting that into a message object and then doing the painful conversion back. So use it, it's a must. I think it's like the de facto thing you have to use in a Flutter app because you're always almost going to be using JSON unless you're crazy and use XML. And so this is the best thing to use there. Now, this is a common little widget pattern that I developed in the app. And this is just like a quick tip in the app, and which is a lot of places I'm using gesture recognizer. And I think almost everyone here is using gesture recognizer to do taps or drags and stuff. What I found is I don't want to keep creating a new gesture recognizer and have like a big syntax there, pass in a child, create a function and stuff. So as well with dialogues, right? You do show dialogue, then you have a really complicated, not complicated, but a big enough method call to create an actual dialogue. So what I did was, because Flutter widgets are these immutables, lightweight widgets, I just stuck them into a static class I call common widget utils. And what I do there is, I have widget utils that add click. And add click takes in a function, a widget and a function. It shouldn't be called container, actually. It should just be a normal widget. And then here, I just create a gesture recognizer. So this really streamlines my development, where I can just do add click, pass in the two parameters, and I'm done. Same thing with show dialog. You can see that a dialog takes in a lot of stuff there. All I do is create dialog, pass in a context and the actual message I want to show, and that's it. I don't need a complicated widget tree in my file there. Next, once I started doing all this stuff, I need to deal with routing. The app has a lot of pages. The demo, I only showed 2 pages, but the app is very deep. There's galleries and videos and rating and all sorts of crazy stuff. And so I needed a good routing system. Flutter's routing system is good, but it doesn't make it easy to pass data through, right? Coming from Android, all I do is I take a bundle and I just pass in a bundle. I look at the other app, and then I can extract that bundle there. It doesn't make it easy. So I looked into the docs, and I found out that you have to use onGenerateRoute and parse in the arguments yourself. I'm lazy, I'm crazy, I don't want to do that. And so I found a great library called Flure, and Flure is built on top of Flutter's routing system. What I like about it has these function handlers that actually pass in the arguments that I passed in the route. So then I can take those arguments and I can convert them or pass them into my state. And I'll show that example in a second. And so that's Flure. That's the cool logo there. And you can see that I have a routes class. And basically, configure routes has tons of routes. In this example, I just have a chat route, and it takes a chat handler function. And then the chat handler function creates a new widget, new chat screen, and takes in the name, ID, and the conversation ID. So when I want to start chatting with a member, I click on the member's profile, and all these arguments are passed in. And the way I call this, let me see, where is it? OK, the way you actually call it is simple. You just call navigator.push and pass in the arguments as you would in a website, like we're doing Angular development or any sort of web development as query parameters, and they'll get parsed into a bundle there. That's where I actually create, you configure your routes at the start. That was just some sample code there. All right, so Flure, use it. It's a must. I find it extremely useful, and that's like the best routing available. The next part that I ran into was images. They're a big part of the app, obviously. There's images everywhere. But I needed something that was robust. I just didn't need something that tried to load an image, didn't cache it, and then just died if the mobile network wasn't working or the person's on like 2G or something. And so I didn't want to write this. Again, I'm lazy. I started looking, and I found something written by Flutter team, actually, called Flutter Image. And it's called Network Image with Retry. And what Network Image with Retry does is it takes a URL, and it tries to fetch the URL. If it fails, it does some algorithm there to try to fetch it again, depending on what's happening with network conditions. And it returns an image provider. Now that you have an image provider, you can take Network Image with Retry and pass it into a circle avatar, decoration, wherever you want. You can take this and just pass it there. So at the bottom there, you can see that I have a container with a center in it and a circle avatar. As you saw, there's a bunch of circle pictures there. And that just takes in a background image that I have a helper class called getProfilePic, which at the top there returns a network image with retry. So really simple. And then I just have a robust image caching and retry solution. Use it. Another quick tip that I found, in the app, in the Android app, I had a lot of fairly lengthy, but plain old Java logic, right? It wasn't using anything Android specific. It was just a lot of DRM and some calculations and stuff that needs to be done. And so I didn't really want to write them in Dart, mainly because they were so long. So being lazy, I've searched Java to Dart converter on Google. And I did find something. I found Java to Dart web. I can actually show you guys an example. Whoops. And basically, you pass in, let me increase it. You pass in some Java, and you get some Dart back, right? And this really helped me just port over a lot of legacy old Java code to Dart easily, just copying and pasting in. Don't try to pass in like actual Android code. most likely won't work. But it's a quick little tip. It'll be in the slides after. Now, this was a big one. And I'll show the demo of the app again for this, but responsive UI. When I click on anything in the app, it makes a network call. Network calls are slow, right? Doesn't matter where you're on your phone, where you are location. Sometimes it'll just be slow. Sometimes your server might be slow. And you just don't want to show a white page, right? So you want to show a progress bar. The way you do that currently in Flutter is you have a show loading equals false. And if show loading is false in your build function, you show a spinner animation. Else, you show your entire widget tree, right? Now, I didn't want to write that over and over again, so I started finding a solution for it. And so what I came across was this great library called Async Loader. Anyone here use this library? Great. Look at this, all this crazy information no one's used. So Async Loader is actually probably the most amazing Flutter library I've seen. And this is how you use it. You create an async loader in your build function, and it has a few parameters there. It has init state, render load, render error, and render success. Init state is basically as the widget is loading, what do you want to load, right? What data do you want to load? As render load is, as it's being loaded, what do you want to show? So in render load, I show a progress bar. Render error is if something went crazy wrong, what do you want to do? So here, for the sake of the demo, I just have new text error loading conversation. So you see like a boring old error loading conversation on the page. What you typically want is some sort of nice little graphic that says, oh, something went wrong, please press back. And then finally, when all your data is loaded, render success is called with your data that you return in checked in your init state. And then you can take that data, and then you can actually render your entire UI. So here in the video, let's go back here. So when I click this, if you see this loading bar, that's actually show progress loading, right? And then it loads, and then once that load is done, it calls render success with all my data, and then there's my entire UI, right? So it really gives me a nice little abstraction it gives a nice little abstraction away rather than having this if sort of logic inside my build function. And then I just take that async loader, pass it to my scaffold, and you're done. So use it. Lastly, with all this done, my app was amazing. I was able to build it in like 5 days, and then I sent it to Apple for approval, and then they'll probably get back like 3 months later. And so I rewrote my entire app. It was really painless. Because I wrote it so quickly, you have to understand that I actually had a lot of the app built. I had the API already written. I had all the interfaces, the logic there. So in a real world application that if you're writing from scratch, you could probably get a real Flutter application done in a week or more actually. But nothing too crazy like a couple months. And my strategy there is to launch iOS first, test it, launch Android after all the testing, and then just delete the Android project. Because whatever, now I can maintain one app and I can make money through it. And that's it. Thank you.